Hey y'all, this is LaLa and Big Rick. We're at the National, where are we?
Civil War.
National Civil War.
Naval Museum.
Naval Museum.
And she just looked at it. Stay tuned.
I did.
This will be fun. So this boat was 220 foot long, roughly, drew a draft of 8 feet, iron plating backed with 2 foot of wood for protection. That is amazing. There's an artist rendering of it.
The CSS Jackson, it was actually launched in December of 1864. And it sat on the Chattahoochee while they finished it. And then they worked on it through the spring of 1865, and it was almost finished. It didn't have any crew members, but it did have a captain who was in charge of it. But on April 16th, 1865, it was captured by Union soldiers. What they did is they set it afire and then they cut it loose, and it floated down the river 30 miles, and then it landed on a sandbar, continued to burn down to the waterline, and then the remainder of it sunk. So it sat on the sandbar until they resurrected it and brought it here. But the ship, which is massive and it's incredible to see in person, never was even in service. So.
LaLa just pointed out something to me, so if you look at the metal frame that's hanging from the ceiling, that would have been the upper part of this boat. There's the stack right in the middle. Where the iron would have sheathed this ship. This is gigantic. So this is the Confederate State Gunboat Chattahoochee. There's a model replica of it. And here is what's left of it. Anchor there. I'm surprised that anchor is not larger than that. What do you know about this ship, LaLa?
This is a gunboat it's the Chattahoochee gunboat. It was actually commissioned in 1861, but it took it a long time to be built because of the location where they were building it. So they finally finished it in January of 1863, and they moved it down the river to Chattahoochee, Florida, on the Apalachicola River. And
the Apalachicola, for reference, is what river flows through Florida,
right,
into the Gulf of Mexico.
Right. But in May of 1863, they were coming to power just outside of Blountstown, and this is a steam-propelled vessel. So as they were building up steam, the boiler burst and actually killed 19 crew members, and many others were injured. and it actually sank.
Yeah, the amazing part is they resurfaced it and
Right.
rebuilt it.
So yeah, they resurfaced it very quickly, and then they rebuilt it and took it back upriver.
It went back into service like a year later.
Went back into service, and then they were Confederate soldiers were actually in a skirmish.
Squirmish or skirmish?
Skirmish.
Skirmish.
I'm kind of squirmy, so it's skirmish. A skirmish. Anyway, so they were in a battle, and instead of allowing the Union soldiers to capture it, they floated 12 miles downstream and they scuttled it, so that
Means in civilian terms,
sunk it.
they sunk it.
Yeah, so that it couldn't be captured by the Union Navy. So.
This is the crew of the USS Hunchback. USS Hunchback began life as a ferry boat in New York, later purchased by the U.S. Navy as part of an expansion of 1961. The ship was converted from a ferry boat to a gunboat. And it gives some kind of unique information about the Hunchback crew. I like this number 1 right here, that picture. Let me read the caption for you. It says, though banned aboard ship in both navies, animals called mascots were found on many ships throughout the Civil War. Though often used for rodent control, they were sometimes simply a novelty. Among the more unusual mascots on record are a bear and an alligator. Well, this was the South, so the alligator doesn't surprise me. The bear does. I'd hate to be bunking with that fella. In history in high school, when we were learning about the Civil War, we learned about the Monitor and the Merrimack. The Monitor being the Union States' primary ironclad, and the Merrimack being the Southern or Confederacy primary ironclad. So this display talks about the Union ironclad, the Monitor. So, and I did not know this, I just knew what the role of the Monitor was, that it was a Union vessel. That's where you can see the USS Monitor stands for United States ship, so that is a Union or Northern vessel. And I did not know how the Monitor was lost. So it was lost when it was ordered into service up in Beaufort, North Carolina. In 1862, so it got up around Cape Hatteras in North Carolina, and it was had to be taken into tow by the Uss Rhode Island, which was a paddle wheel vessel, and the Monitor just could not sustain the waves, the seas in that area. It was taking on a lot of water. Well, eventually it became so flooded that they ended up cutting the vessel loose, and the Monitor sunk very, very quickly. So it's located about 12 miles off the coast of North Carolina, in the Monitor National Marine Sanctuary. It was damaged so significantly it flipped upside down and is resting even today on its top side. The decision was made not to try to recover it, but instead to recover just bits and pieces of it as they could. So this picture up at the top shows some of the gun turrets, engines, and artillery that were taken off of the vessel that are now going through electrolysis treatment to try to save them. Electrolysis treatment is really a chemistry process, whereas rust is chemically removed while saving the underlying iron. So speaking of the Monitor, these are a series of photos of sailors on the USS Monitor taken in the afternoon of July 9th, 1862. The Monitor was lying in the James River in Virginia at the time. and had just been visited by President Abraham Lincoln earlier in the day. And that picture right there with the sailor standing above is replicated right here. This is another model of the CSS Confederate State Ship Virginia. Look at the size of that thing. Look at the gun turrets. 1, 2, 3, 4 on one side, one on the aft. Single propeller. Another gun port on the top, or on the forecastle, the front end of the ship. Some gun turrets on the corners for leading corners, and then 4 more on the side. And then this is a mock-up of the Monitor, just to kind of give you a frame of reference of the difference in size between the very first ironclad, the Monitor, and later ironclads such as the Virginia. That's a pretty darn significant. Difference. Now look at those right there. That is a 15-inch cannonball, and I'm wondering how in the world would they ever load that? I think that on the front says 455. I don't know if that's the number of pounds or whatever, but it's a 15-inch solid steel cannonball. And in response to how do you load that, here's the picture of how they loaded that. So they used block and tackle to lift that ball up to the end of the cannon, and then they loaded it from this track right here. Lift it up, slide it into the cannon. That's pretty cool. And then this was pretty interesting here. If you look over there on top of that barrel, there's what's called Grape Shot. That Grape Shot would then be loaded into canisters that when it was shot is packed into a tin canister, and then there were smaller projectiles even than the Grape Shot. Then this right here, although it's not marked, we believe to be a Civil War era mine. So this is appears to be a wooden type barrel. This appears to be a wooden type barrel with triggers on the top to activate this mine if ships would hit it. So this thing probably floated. The vessels would hit the triggers and then activate the gunpowder, whatever the explosive is inside. That's pretty neat. Another type of cannon here. The other side of that wall with all of the Navy flags that were flown. So the blue flag indicates that this is Admiral Buchanan's flagship, that this is the ship that he is on. So interesting. So obviously these are Confederate flags. There's a Union flag. So all of these, interestingly, were all flown on actual vessels. So this flag up here was flown on the USS Water Witch. And this Confederate flag here was flown at well, this wasn't a ship. This was flown at Fort Caswell in Wilmington, North Carolina. This big old flag here, not sure what that thing flew on, but that's probably some form, that's probably a Confederate battle ensign. So this was flown on the SS, or I'm sorry. So this was flown on the CSS Atlanta. Largest known surviving Confederate naval flag. That is gigantic. It measures 24 foot by 16 feet. Yeah, it looks as big as it sounds. That would probably be about 2 stories tall. Curious about that one with just the Navy anchor. This was a small boat flag on the USS Black Hawk, likely Admiral Porter's personal flag, intended to fly from the stern of one of the USS Black Hawk small boats reserved for his use. So this white flag, so this was a signal flag from Fort Jackson, measured 6 foot by 4 feet, and was flown from Fort Jackson, indicated surrender to Union naval forces following Admiral Farragut's capture of New Orleans. It is marked signal for surrender, flying on Fort Jackson when it surrendered to the mortar fleet commanded by Commodore D.D. Porter on April 26, 1862. So that is the surrender flag from Fort Jackson. So this piece here is just a remnant of the ensign from the USS Galena. That was an ironclad, it appears. So what's amazing to me is that how well these flags have been maintained and held for preservation. I think is absolutely critical that young people have the opportunity to be able to read about and visualize and see our history. Not just read about it in books, but to actually visit and observe them and read about them firsthand. Doesn't matter whether you live in the North or the South, just to read about our history. So this is a little bit of history that I was not aware of. So the United States Naval Academy, everyone's heard of that, in Annapolis, Maryland. This is where the officers for the United States, for the United States ships or the Union Navy, this is where their officers generally were educated. 4 years of training and they'd become naval officers. So, and this is something I've never heard of. So in response, the Confederate states knew that they needed a university or a training setting for Confederate sailors or Confederate officers to be trained. So their university or training boat was the Css Patrick Henry, an armored component of the James River Squadron, which served as a floating school ship. Patrick Henry was converted for the purpose of classrooms, a mess hall, and living quarters. It's pretty cool. So here's a mural that really gives a lot of reference to really the variety of vessels that served in the Confederate and Northern Navy. So what I find really interesting, so this one here would be probably steam powered. You notice there's no wheel on it. And then this one here has a gigantic paddle wheel right here, but interestingly, it is also covered in iron. So the entire propulsion system, even on the paddle wheel, ironclads, was also covered in iron. Just amazing.